Welcome to the AgEmerge podcast, brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. Your farming challenges are unique, so your practices should be too. We're here to share emerging ideas, build connections, and provoke conversation.
Get ready to improve your soil, your crops, your livestock, and your family's livelihood. I'm your producer, Kim Chase.
And I'm your host, Monty Bottens. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Today we welcome Emily Usher-DeaKyne. Emily is a natural resource social scientist at Purdue University and the Diverse Corn Belt Project manager. The project started in 2021 to diversify Midwestern agriculture beyond corn and soybeans in Indiana, Illinois, and Iowa. It explores systems like extended rotations, agroforestry, and livestock integration, involving over 30 partners in research, economics, and stakeholder engagement. The project aims to overcome barriers like market and policy, to enhance resilience, and to promote sustainability through on-farm studies, education, and outreach. This conversation will get you thinking about all these possibilities. So let's jump right in.
Well, welcome everyone to this episode of the AgEmerge podcast. Today, I'm joined by Emily Usher-DeaKyne. Welcome, Emily. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Monty.
Well, Emily, we bumped into each other. It's been a little while ago now, and I accuse you of being a part of an organization that it has an oxymoron in its name. Okay, so Emily is with the Diverse Corn Belt Initiative. So I said, now wait a minute. If we're going to call this diverse, we can't call it Corn Belt at the same time. So anyway, Emily, tell us about yourself, your story, and what brought you to this initiative that you're working with now.
Great. Well, again, thanks, Monty, for having us on. My name is Emily Usher-DeaKyne. I'm the project manager for the Diverse Corn Belt Project, and that project is out of Purdue University. A little bit about myself. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up outside of Chicago, Illinois, and I was always interested in sort of the natural environment. I have an undergraduate degree in plant biology. I went out west and sort of worked for the Bureau of Land Management for a little bit until I realized that I'm a little bit more of a people person than the Bureau of Land Management can provide for. So I went to University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, got a master's there, and started working with Linda Prokopi at Purdue after that. So most of the work that we've been doing, that Linda has been doing and I've been helping support, was focused on practice adoption. So we're thinking a lot about no-till, we're thinking a lot about cover crops and sort of how can we get more acres in these practices. After doing that for a while, we kind of started thinking like, what's the next step? Like we've been, telling people to do cover crop adoption until our face is blue, but are we moving the needle? Unsure. We think so. Like this Diverse Corn Belt project is sort of the next step in that sort of line of thinking. And the idea is we need to diversify our agricultural landscapes and sort of think beyond no-till and cover crops and start thinking about systems change. So we applied for a USDA NIFA grant. And that's the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We were awarded this $10 million 5-year grant in 2001. So the focus of the project is about diversifying the agricultural landscape. And when we talk about diverse systems, we're focusing on extended rotation, perennial bioenergy crops, integrated livestock, horticultural food crops, and agroforestry. So with those sort of 5 systems, we are exploring opportunities and challenges on the landscape and in the marketplace about, how we can make the Corn Belt a more diversified landscape. So that's kind of the long and short of how I've come to be sitting here with you today.
Well, that's awesome, and I think it's interesting when you first started this, you have to think, oh well, yeah, looking at some agroforestry, and permaculture things, horticulture. These are and extended rotations. Hey, these are all the things that need to be done. No problem, right? Easy peasy. Yet that has involved a lot of people. So maybe pick one of these and kind of walk through all the things that you and your team have learned over time that's involved in making some alternative other than corn and soybeans truly economically viable, all the different parties that are involved. I'm sure everyone listening's aware of some, but when you sit in a group of meeting here with all the various stakeholders, it is just somewhat overwhelming, and really they're competing interests, to make that happen. So maybe pick one of those and walk us through the complexities involved in making this a reality.
Sure. So I'll talk about extended rotation. And the reason that I'm picking extended rotation is because that is what we hear is what, sort of people are calling it the low-hanging fruit. And I'll explain sort of why. But before I do that, I want to highlight, the Diverse Corn Belt Project is like a very large cornerstone of this project is stakeholder engagement. So what we are doing, sort of there's lots of different elements of the Diverse Corn Belt Project. We have biophysical work, we have economic work, but a lot of what I personally do is a lot of the social work and engaging with stakeholders. So all of the work that is sort of coming out of the stakeholder engagement element of the Diverse Corn Belt Project is really informed by our stakeholders. So we've held focus groups, and we've also been doing these reimagining agricultural diversity teams. So Monty, you participated in the focus groups, and all of sort of these findings that we have are really informed by the people that participated and the people that shared their perspective with us. Um, so that being said, what we are hearing is extended rotation is a low-hanging fruit somewhat because a lot of the infrastructure already exists. So a lot of the on-farm infrastructure, you can use the same equipment. In terms of agronomically, it can fit easily into a corn and bean rotation. So that's the whole idea with extended rotation is adding a different crop, adding another crop to that corn and bean. So that's also sort of an easier on-ramp for people. Change is challenging for everybody. And when we're talking about systems change, and ag systems change, you're talking about changing an environment that may be pretty, what is the word? Like rock solid, like a pretty resilient environment or hard to change, recalcitrant, that's the word. So what we hear is a lot of it focuses on markets and economics. A lot of people talk about the markets piece being a chicken or egg situation. But what we're hearing from our participants is that it's not really a chicken or egg situation. It's like just an egg situation. The farmers are not going to grow things that there's not a market for it to sell. So that's sort of one of the bottom or like sort of one of the first challenges of changing these systems or increasing these diversified systems is there has to be a market. And what do we mean by market? We mean processing, we need infrastructure, we need transportation. So for a viable extended rotation crop, let's say like Milo. Is that a good example? There would need to be a processing plant within proximity of the place of the acres that it's being grown. And it needs to be so processing plant that has access to the growers, and there needs to be able to transport it. There needs to be a place to sell it. There needs to be a place to consolidate it. So there's lots of challenges in that market space. And a lot of the discussion is sort of the missing processor piece or like that missing piece in there. And there's a lot of processing plants for corn, beans. There's becoming more for wheat, which is great for extended rotation. But there's sort of a missing piece there that if there were more plants that supported or processing plants, processing facilities that supported more diverse crops, that would be the thing that really drives the landscape change. Um, there's also lots of discussion about sort of risk management and sort of the ability to sort of how risk manage. So federal crop insurance sort of enables the corn and bean rotation because it is managed, it is insured. So that sort of eliminates or decreases the interest for people to sort of go outside of that. So there's lots of discussion about sort of providing risk management opportunities for diversified crops. So those crops that could be that third or fourth crop in rotation. It would be great to have some risk management for that. Um, Another sort of element that we hear a lot about is sort of access to information. So if you have a problem or a question about your beans, you know exactly who to call, and they'll be out at your farm in a couple of minutes to help you out. If you have a problem about maybe triticale or milo or any other of these small grains, you might have a little harder time finding some information about that. So sort of access to information and sort of buy-in from sort of the retailer side of the advisor side is also another thing that we hear a lot about.
So those are three of the things that are really limiting us, like you're saying, on the adoption of something other than corn and beans in the rotation. Um, so let me ask you this, just to play a little bit of the devil's advocate.
Mhm.
We're missing the processing for Milo as an example, but all the Milo that's being produced today is meeting the demand, right? How do you find that unmet demand? Because Um, or is there unmet demand? Because what's the need for a processor if there's no demand for the whatever sorghum flour or the feed ingredient out of it or those kind of things that they would make Milo into? So, I mean, the math is pretty simple to build it, right? It's a matter of that market. So how is there, back to the chicken and the egg thing?
Mhm.
Do we know? How do we identify those unmet demands, or how does what are more efficient ways of doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't have a great answer for you, unfortunately. But what we do here is that sort of processing and milling facilities do provide opportunities for change on the landscape. So it's a little bit of if you build it, they will come type of attitude, is what we've heard. That attitude is kind of scary because there's a lot of investment in a lot of financial,
Hmm.
emotional, mental investment that goes into putting something like that. So that's a big risk to take on, and something not everybody is willing to do. But I think as growing interest in a different crop in rotation or a third crop in rotation can drive those markets. So I think um, it's a long game, but I think that if there are places, if there are more processing facilities that provide other options for diversified crops, people will see that and they will be able to then grow that.
So how do we attract a Milo processor to the Corn Belt? Let's say because let's say there is that demand for Milo, they're most likely going to locate to Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, where Milo is currently grown. It's a drought tolerant crop. It's a lower value crop, so the
Hmm.
land values and those things give us a and the farmers are more inclined to want to switch to Milo because of their lack of water in those areas. Lower land costs to build the plant, lower energy costs. How do we, maybe I'm picking on Milo too much, but I'm just thinking, how do we there's a reason why um, those crops or those alternatives have migrated outside of our, three I states.
True.
Is because maybe the weather drives it, land value drives it, closer to the end market, those kind of things. Um, how do we overcome or bring those back? I guess there's you know what I mean. There's energy costs obviously in shipping everything long distances, but the energy costs as a percent of the final product is still minimal. So what have been some other things the teams come up with on how to bring this back? Is there a play then on how the market wants to buy more locally?
Yeah, so maybe not so much with Milo as an example, but with other crops that are, there's lots of discussion about food sovereignty and protein sovereignty. So how can we enable, in Illinois, there's lots of how can Illinois feed Illinois? There's lots of discussion about sort of having sustainable local food systems and sort of working with federal and state policies to enable a market for that. So talking about institutional buying in schools and prisons and whatnot, places that are purchasing lots of food, how can we enable those people to be able to purchase from local farms as opposed to Aramark or something like that. So that's been a big discussion on the horticultural food side. Um, And, I think a lot of the, like on the agroforestry side, it's a lot about markets, and agroforestry is a little bit different because it's on like a totally different time scale than all of the other ones. But um, yeah, and I mean, I think for for the extended rotation and the market element, I think a lot of it is, there's a consumer element to this. Consumers are always sort of pulling or pushing the demand about things. So it's complicated and there's no simple answers. And I think the way that we can kind of promote this is just let people know that people are interested in these products and in these crops.
Absolutely. Now, I think one of the the third element that you mentioned was info access, or
Hmm.
like retailers and advisors and those kind of things. So this is one great thing we have going for us now is that's easier than ever before, right?
Hmm.
YouTube University and podcasts, so those kind of things. Their information flow and connectivity is so much easier. So I think that's going to be a smaller and smaller barrier as we go forward. But let's dive into the risk assessment thing a little bit, or risk mitigation.
Yeah.
How how are we walk us through some examples of how inadvertently we are favoring less diversity through our current crop insurance, and maybe then what are some of the solutions to this? We can have the Australian approach. There's only good farmers in Australia because they got rid of their crop insurance, right?
I'm not sure if
Is
we're ready for that
or
one.
is there well, we may not be ready, but might be what we deserve. I don't know. Uh, Maybe there's some other approach in between, but walk us through that whole, because I know that's been a big part of the work that you've done on this project.
Yeah. So a lot of what we hear about risk management and crop insurance, sort of these subsidies essentially prop up the corn and bean market because it provides a safety net for them. So if I have a field that is in corn and beans and is fully insured, um, if that field, say, floods, I am insured for that. So I do not take a hit on that. My bottom line doesn't take a hit. So if, say, that field floods every year, um, one would think that might not be a good field to be planting corn in. Maybe I should, maybe you could plant something else, or maybe it could go
Right.
into something, anything else, rice. That's a good idea. But the way that the crop or the crop insurance system is sort of set up is that that operator or that farmer gets that insurance payout every year, regardless of whether or not the practices that he's using and the decisions that he's making have the best sort of management outcomes in mind. So you're able to continuously crop in places that are maybe not the best suited for it. So it enables risky practices and does not have a sort of cost associated with it. It ensures the risk of that. So instead of somebody, planting in a flooded field, and then continuing to do that and continuing to get crop insurance from that field, maybe if there was less of an incentive to sort of keep that practice going, that could be a different crop. That could be a in conservation reserve, CRP, or something along those lines. So, what we hear from folks related to risk management for diversified crops is that it is very hard to get crop insurance on crops that are not corn and bean. Or I think it depends on what county you're in, but most places it's hard to get crop insurance for those crops. So what we hear from folks who are producing these diversified crops is that they would like to have somewhat of an equal playing ground and some sort of risk management for for their crops. And I think we hear a lot about sort of how crop insurance works and the decisions that go into it. And it's related to the risk management agency and records of crops and records of yields and that sort of I'm probably explaining something that you already know, but sort of what we're hearing and how I'm interpreting it is that the counties collect data, and then they are able to assess that risk, and that's sort of how it goes. So that's a big limiting factor for diversified crops that don't have a lot of acreage in that county or don't have a whole lot of yield data from that. So So yeah, I think diversified producers want to sort of have a bit of a more even playing field with that. Lots of discussion about whole farm insurance as well, but we hear lots of challenges with that. And yeah, that's sort of what we got.
Well, well, whole farm is a step, right? You gotta try some things. But one of the things that is interesting is essentially the actuarial costs are covered by the farmer, right, and the expense costs of the premium are covered by the government. So roughly, let's just say half. It varies percentage. Sometimes it's 60% is covered by government. Sometimes less than 50. Um, but if I'm writing a check for $40 an acre, let's say for crop insurance, that means the government wrote a check for $40 an acre, right? So can there be $40 an acre of application of coverage? And I'm sure there's some cooperative with the whole farm too, or let farmers go ahead and have that insurance and make it more cost competitive to where maybe people don't have 50% overheads and get more down to 35, 38 like other insurance products are. But then the farmer makes that decision that, hey, yeah, it's worth it to me to not just actuarially break even over 20 years or whatever the period of time is, but for me to bear risk associated with either I save up and capitalize my farm and absorb that risk, or I pay 35 to 50% extra in premiums because I haven't done the savings side. So I think if we could tone that back, it would really change the dynamic of crop choices. It would not make it an easy decision just to keep going corn, soybeans. So uh, I'm
Yeah.
afraid, Emily. I'm even though I'm a farmer who takes out these insurance products because it's just a matter of what you need to do because those insurance products elevate rental rates and farm value rates. Um, if we would have a moment of ripping the Band-Aid, it might be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah. And these sort of ideas that you have, I think these are sort of the ideas that are really kind of, helping to really inform our work. And sort of at the end of the day, with our work, the Diverse Corn Belt Project, we hope to really come up with solid policy recommendations moving forward for state and federal policymakers. So, and sort of our whole sort of mantra of talking with people, getting people like you and your other farmers like you, your ideas, and incorporating those into these recommendations is sort of what our whole goal is.
Tell me some surprising thing, or excuse me, tell me some surprising things that you've learned through this process, or just some things that jumped out at you that you never would have thought of before.
Well, something that I think is cool, and I like about my job is that I get to talk with people who love what they do and whose, life surrounds what they do. And I just kind of get to pick people's brains about that. So what we often end up talking a lot about is family. Um, Farming families is a big topic of discussion, and it's something that lots of people want to encourage. So there's lots of discussion anxiety about farm consolidation, farms getting larger, sort of big ag getting bigger, and sort of that identity of the small family farm, or a family farm, not necessarily small, is sort of being swept up in this. So there's lots of discussion about how diversification can enable and sort of grow family farms. Excuse me, something that I think is very cool. People are talking. We talk to people about how did you get into this? Tell me about your operation and how you've evolved. People are like, oh, well, I was all corn and beans, and then my son went off to college, and he came back, and he wanted to come to the farm, and we had to figure out how to accommodate him, how to bring in another family. And what they had talked about doing is incorporating some cattle. So like being able to do more with the same amount of acreage, and being able to sort of build, stacking that enterprise, and being able to bring others into the loop. So I really love that sort of story and that idea, of sort of being able to do more and support more with the same piece of ground. Land access is a huge challenge for folks who are trying to break into the farming industry or who are trying to expand their operation. So diversification is a great way to sort of help manage that. Um, and sort of along those same lines, something that I was like, when I think about it now, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But I was not fully, I didn't anticipate how big of a discussion, sort of the impact diversification could have on rural communities. So lots of folks that come to our meeting have are from rural communities and notice a decline in them. People often think about, when I was growing up, there was the XYZ, Main Street was popping, and now there's not. And people see diversification as being a great opportunity to revitalize rural communities. So those are kind of some of the real interesting, cool things that I think that I wasn't necessarily expecting to find.
The AgEmerge podcast is brought to you by Ag Solutions Network. The ASN team is hands-on, digging in and invested in regenerative agriculture. Along with the proper plant nutrition and biologicals to boost your soil microbiome, we provide the ideas and implementation guidance to support you on your soil health journey. So stop farming the same way and contact Ag Solutions Network today at asn.farm.
So let's dive into this family dynamic a little more.
Yeah.
Think about how farmers are advertised too, right? The big new shiny equipment and all of our trade associations that we either willingly or forcefully pay money to, uh, the whole checkoffs and Farm Bureau, those kind of things, and they're always really how much diversity is in their advertising, their media, their storyline, right? Where if we could shift that a little bit and unleash that family dynamic, that family value, continuity, ingrainedness that we have. How many farmers have had the discussion with their son or daughter and said, you know what, you need to go to college. The opportunity here on the farm is just not that good, and go get yourself a good job, and I'll farm, and when it's done, you can have the farm do what you want or rent it out to whoever you want. I would say that's a conversation that happens way too much, and it depends on the economy, right? That happened a lot in
Hmm.
the 80s, and we lost, you know, a huge generation of talent just gone. I mean, it went into ag industry or other industries, but on the farm. And what if we created a dynamic that would encourage opportunities or stimulate thinking on how we can bring the son or daughter back into the operation, just like what you said with smaller family. Hey, we've got more mouths to feed, but no more land to feed it from. Right.
Hmm.
So how do we make more out of the land that we have? How do we, fancy word, stack enterprises? And um, maybe that's a real avenue to poke on because that is there, right?
Yeah.
Farmers are good at fixing anything. Just give us enough baling wire, duct tape, and cable ties. We can make it happen, right? Um, what if we encouraged and promoted that? Would the solution find itself?
I think that's a great question. And I am employed by Purdue University. We have lots of people on this project from University of Illinois, UW-Madison, Iowa State. So all of these land grant universities in the Corn Belt. And so I all of that, I come from this place, but I think a lot of this sort of recalibrating or shifting the environment or the thinking about farming, land grant universities have a really great opportunity to do that. I don't think that land grant universities are necessarily on the forefront of sort of changing that. I think that a lot of land grant universities are sort of in that sort of status quo area. Um, and I think that there's a lot of interest coming from, sort of these land grant universities and sort of exploring that a little bit more. So another element of the Diverse Corn Belt Project is our education team. So we have 6 objectives. That's one of them. And our education team is developing modules for college and high school students about diversified agriculture. So out of, the Diverse Corn Belt Project, we see that opportunity, and also knowing that where we sit in our place in academia, we hope that we're able to sort of encourage land grant universities to sort of think about their curriculum, and think about how they can incorporate some of these more diversified systems, diversified practices, and really a diversified mindset into their education. Um, but yes, I mean, I think that it all kind of starts from education, and I think at the end of the day, that has a large influence on how people work.
So, talk to us some more about some of the other systems that to help people listening to think more diversity, because we just get in a rut, right? Help us think outside of that. And you mentioned one that's a little more longer term is the whole agroforestry thing. What the heck is agroforestry? Huh? Are you are you saying I need to be a lumberjack, or how does this I don't understand even what that word means. What are the possibilities? What kind of crazy stuff is this? Walk us through that, and what some of the possibilities are for the stacking and the enterprises in that scenario.
Yeah, so I guess first I want to say I'm not an expert on agroforestry.
And
We
neither
do
am
a lot.
I. You know more than me, so
I
yeah.
can I can explain, but
Yeah.
if anyone is interested in learning more about agroforestry from the experts, the Savannah Institute is really sort of who we partner with a lot of, and they're a great resource. But agroforestry is a lot of things. So agroforestry, how we are envisioning agroforestry potentially playing a role in diversification is, so agroforestry can do a lot. There can be sort of infrastructure elements, so having windbreaks, being able to sort of use the tree as a physical barrier to wind, stopping erosion, etc. But there's also opportunities for sort of growing trees with crops. So there's a really great example of that. So here in Indiana, there's a group who, and this is a long-term project, but they're planting walnut trees, and for as long as the and I think that they're maybe we'll say 60, no, they're probably more than 60 inches. They're a couple feet apart, the way that they plant them. And for the first 10, 15 years or so of these walnuts, they are going to have corn in between there. So they are able to double crop, sort of plant the walnuts, and they're on sort of a different time scale, and then they have the corn in between, and they're able to do that for quite a while, or at least, a decade or so. Um, Other opportunities, there's like silvopasture. So if you have grazing animals and you're able to put them out in the woods, that's also a great pasture option. And agroforestry really kind of hangs its hat on the long-term environmental and biophysical benefits of trees and what they provide for the environment. So I think agroforestry it's a little bit it's on a different time scale than all of these other systems that we're kind of talking about. But it counts as perennialization of the landscape, and carbon sequestration, and providing fruit, and providing all of those environmental benefits.
And then another one you mentioned is hort crops. So,
Yeah.
a lot of people aren't too excited about, becoming vegetable farmers or may not have the land for it and those kind of things. But is there an opportunity? Has anything been floated? Because let's say we're running out of water in California, where the majority of our vegetables come from, and we're shipping, expensive shipping those, 2-man teams across the country so we can have fresh produce in Chicago and New York. Um, how do we, is there a way to help that industry, or what would be some of the key elements of working with like a Taylor Farms or a Tanner and Annal, or those kind of folks to put processing locally, and then essentially have a farm crew that would go out and farm and propagate it as a rotation where they would come and say, okay, Mr. Farmer, we want this X amount of acres, and you prep the land for us and those kind of things, and we'll pay you $700 or $1,000 an acre, but we're going to come in, we'll transplant it, provide our crew for irrigation, weeding, and all that jazz. Is has any progress been made in that kind of a scenario to bring horticulture here at scale?
So there's been a few discussions about that. It's definitely on sort of the mind of people, especially as sort of the water crisis in California or like whatever's going on over there. I think that farmers, being the entrepreneurial spirit that they are, recognize that and are thinking about that. We've talked to a few people who I think are who do some of that work, and they have shared some sort of challenges with that. Challenges that you might expect. Somebody coming onto your farm and doing a business on your property. So there's lots of ruts and there's no leeway in timing. But I think generally we haven't heard a ton about that, but there is opportunity. And I think that a lot of the discussions, particularly around horticultural food crops, sort of thinks back to what it was like before sort of this larger, more specialized cropping system sort of came to the farm. And a lot of people think, nobody's trying to go back to way that farming was in the 1920s, but there are elements of that 1920s system that people think can be modernized and provide benefits for 21st century agriculture. So, so yes, I think that people see it as an option, see it as an opportunity, and it's still within sort of the historic minds of people. People still remember that. So it's definitely possible, and I think that it is becoming more and more of an opportunity for Midwestern farmers.
Let's back up a step and look at the current market dynamics now. I would say if there was ever an interest in looking at alternative crops or something other than corn, soybeans, it's typically not when they're at all-time record high levels, right?
Mhm.
I think at this moment in time when we're at you know pretty poor cash flows and profitability projections on corn and soybeans. Um, and the interesting thing is, at this moment, most people think wheat's going to be down significantly too. Soybean to corn price ratio looks pretty poor. So at this moment in time of this recording, which I've never been good at predicting future prices, so I'm not attempting to now, but it does look to favor pretty heavy corn planting here this spring. What do you what are is this an opportunity, a time for people to strike? And then the other thing I look at on top of this is, you know, a large consumer of acres of corn at 38 to 42%, depending on the year, is ethanol, right? Now, I realize the DDG is repurposed as protein for animal feed, but gosh, that came into being because of legislation, right? Not because of market pull. Um, it can go out of being as of legislation. So that's a wild swing in an already potentially depressed market. What what should farmers be looking at today? I mean, how should they be adopting? Because they need to make a change, right? What are some things that they can be looking at in 2025 or for sure in 2026?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that what sort of the ethanol mandate and sort of that type of stuff and sort of market volatility, increasing market volatility, increasing input prices, all of that stuff, is really kind of the one of the driving premises of the project is that when the dominant system is no longer benefiting the people who are in it, they are going to look for other options. So that is the whole joie de vivre of the Diverse Corn Belt Project. What are these options? What do people think about these options? What can we do to enable these sort of what can we do to enable these alternative pathways? So, I mean, I think people need to start. I'm not in the business of advising farmers at all, so I can't necessarily say what people should be doing, or could be doing. But I do think that lots of people are thinking about alternative crops. Lots of people are thinking about trying to find a crop to put in that third rotation. And there's lots of decisions that have to go into what that crop is. There's market considerations, there's infrastructure, on farm, off farm, capacity, all of those types of things. So I think that there's lots of decisions that go into making a change like that. So I think that farmers need to kind of think about where they want to be and think about where they're going and how what can they do to get there.
And I think a tremendous opportunity now is for a person who's been a grain farmer to put on, dad or grandpa's hat, and he wasn't just a grain farmer, and the cattle market at this moment in time, while it's extraordinarily high priced to buy feeders, if you look at the cows, the cow herd itself, and replacement rates, because the high prices, people are like, hey, I'm going to take that replacement header and take a check today versus hopefully get into the cow business in a couple of years from now. And um, there's a lot of opportunity there. Looking outside of just the rotation, why can't a four-legged critter be a rotation, right? And
Exactly.
plus all the soil health benefits associated with it. And there's just, you have to open your eyes and see, and not just focus on what's, oh, woe is me. It's everything's terrible. Um, it does surprise me. We've been told by the world population is going to double, and people want to eat more and more, and farmers, you have to feed the world. Well, guess what? We've geared up to do it, and it's like, come on, people, eat. We've got the goods here. Come on, you guys said you're going to eat more, so let's get going, right? Or maybe we just need a good old fashioned drought for a few years in a row to help prices come back. But I don't think we can count on that as our business plan. So really rethinking your crop mix also includes rethinking your livestock mix too. Um, have you heard a lot of that coming through in the focus groups you've had recently?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about grazed livestock and sort of how the opportunities and challenges of that system. One of the challenges is it's a lot of work. Cattle is a lot of work, and if you're a row crop person,
Well,
you
being
might not
broke,
have.
hey, being broke is a lot of work too.
That is
Going
true.
going through bankruptcy court and having an auction and all these things, that's work too, folks. So anyway, I'm sorry. Continue on.
Well, so, it's a challenge to take that on. But what we have heard a lot about is sort of the opportunity to connect people. So being able to find a livestock person within close proximity to a row crop person and being able to sort of make that match. So like that kind of speaks to networking and capacity building within communities and being able to work within a community or I guess work as a community to sort of enable these landscape changes. So yeah, that's a lot of the discussion about livestock. The folks who do graze livestock do a really great job and are able to really sort of tweak that system, and people want to see more livestock on the landscape. But some of the challenges are definitely out there and rearing their heads.
But I mean, just a gain in having, even if it's not grass-fed livestock, just having like a bed pack barn and feeding corn silage. It's a way to diversify your income streams and still participate in a market that is readily available. Um, and maybe converting some of those marginal lands that we took out um, of pasture or CRP, and putting that back into a pasture sequence, and with virtual fencing and GPS driven tractors and these kind of things, we don't have to farm whole blocks as one. We can pasture areas need pastured. We can row crop the rest, and get a cow herd in place. And again, another way for that family dynamic to bring the son or daughter back into the operation. Um, at at the end of the day, it's really a creativity problem, isn't it?
Yes, I just wrote that down. And we talk a lot about that, or we have heard people talk a lot about that. So one of our postdocs, Lauren Aspruth, out of she's out of UW Wisconsin, she and Purdue, she interviewed people about sort of how they got to where they are, these diversified producers, and a lot of it was creative thinking and like sort of an out of the box idea or an out of the box mentality. And I think that, when the dominant system isn't working, you do have to sort of put on your thinking hat and be able to sort of make something from what you have. So that is diversification, and that's sort of how lots of people who have had success in diversified operations have just said it's that's what they like about having a diversified operation is it enables them to be a creative problem solver and a creative thinker. So that's a and I think farmers generally are creative, logical, problem-solving folks. So it makes sense.
And it's a local context too. You know, if you go out to Nebraska after grain harvest and you don't have cows out on your pivots, somebody thinks there's something wrong with you because that you graze your corn stalks.
Yeah.
Everybody does that. I mean, that is just the common driving down the road. That is what you see. And it wasn't too many decades ago that guess what? That's what you saw here. I remember as a little kid, this is kind of a funny story, but I always heard people call stock cows. Like, oh, those are the stock cows. Okay, I thought they meant stalk, STALK, as in corn stalk. You know, that's the cows that you put on the corn stalks. And when you're 3 or 4, you can have an excuse to mess that up, right? I should have that right by now, but um, that's just the way I considered it because when I was a kid, that's what you saw was corn stalks and stock cows. So it was um, just a way of being, and I think we've kind of lost that. And I think and I might get some hate mail for this, but hey, farmers, quit being entitled. I mean, you're not entitled to 4 weeks of planting, 8 weeks of harvest in Florida. Okay, it, no other business has that guarantee for life. And we want things to get a little easier, and there is technology to make livestock easier. But hey, no one ever said sign up for farming. It's easy. You know, we have to be willing to do the hard work, and sometimes that hardest work is making this creative brain work again. Um, so is that part of the education resources you're looking at within your team is help stimulate that creative thinking?
Yeah, so we sort of try to call it systems thinking. That's like sort of the academic or the way that like we talk
I think
about
it
it.
sounds really cool too. Yeah.
Yeah, systems thinking. And that's like a whole body of knowledge and stuff like that, but applying systems thinking to agriculture and trying to instill like systems thinking is kind of a mindset and trying to instill that and apply that to agriculture is definitely incorporated in our education modules because the goal of those modules is to educate future farmers, future consumers, future advisors, and future eaters. So systems thinking is good.
Okay. So now you're going to look back on this at the completion of the project, or you pick the date, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. We sit down and have another one of these chats. What are you going to say that you accomplished?
Well, what the goal of the Diverse Corn Belt Project, I should have said this in the beginning, to inform the conversation about diversification. So, we're very proud to be a USDA grantee. We are very fortunate to have $10 million and 5 years to do this. But at the end of the day, $10 million in 5 years is a drop in the bucket. So what we are hoping to do with this work is really inform that discussion about diversification and give it information and space to move forward on the farm, at the State House, and at the White House. So I hope that um, things everything changes and it's hard to predict the future. There's lots of things we know that sort of go into that, but I hope in 10 years that the conversation is still focused on diversification and that we do see a more diversified landscape and a more diversified corn belt, um, and that it's, that we played a part in sort of having that conversation and informing those decisions moving forward.
That's great. And this is something we should have said. Why is this important? I mean, who cares about diversity, right? Corn and soybeans, everything's great. Why should we care about this? And I think to add to that, of the five soil health principles, I thought integrating livestock would be the hardest thing to do. Uh-uh, that's easy. Diversifying is, I think, the hardest thing to do. But so what? Who cares? Why is this? Why do you think this is important? Speak to the ecosystem services associated with diversification.
Yeah, so I mean, this is important because this is life. This is the landscape. Agriculture takes up, I don't know the percent, but it's a pretty large percentage of Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. And what happens on the landscape really impacts the people. It impacts your air, it impacts your water, it impacts your future. So diversification is important because I think diversification enables agriculture to continue to grow and to continue to support rural communities across the three I-states. So there's like sort of a social element to it. Biophysically, I think that generally speaking, economic, biophysical, all of these sort of systems have been proven time and again to really benefit from diversification. Diversification is a risk management strategy in itself. So when a dominant system is no longer working for you, whether due to physical, economic, social elements, there needs to be a change. And we are trying to provide options and understand these options for change. Um, so I think diversification really does provide lots of opportunities for that.
That is awesome. So now, farmers, listen to this. Don't be like the people that when they ask how many farmers it takes to change a light bulb, right? Do you know the answer to this, Emily?
No.
Well, whenever you're asked how many farmers it takes to change a light bulb, the answer is change. Huh, why change, right? So anyway, we need to be looking, and now's the time to be looking. If you should be economically motivated, be looking at doing something different. So if people want to learn more on what they can do, how they can join and be a part of the process, how do they reach out and connect with the Diverse Corn Belt Initiative?
Sure. There's lots of different ways. So we are on Twitter, we are on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of the socials. We also have a website that's www.diversecornbelt.org. So on that website, there's lots of the work that we've been doing, lots of reports and sort of what we've been up to. You can sign up for our newsletter on that website. And there's also an opportunity to sign up for other elements, or you could simply email me, eusher @purdue.edu.
Well, very good. I hope some people reach out and participate in maybe there's events that they have and listening sessions that you can be involved with too. But I think it's a great thing that they're doing, and I hope that it does make an impact. It starts some new thinking, some new discussion, because I'm constantly looking for how can we do something different, because I don't like having all my eggs in one basket. That's just all there is to it, and I don't think that's a very wise thing for anyone to do. So, anything else we should have visited about while we were together today, Emily?
I don't think so. I just want to say thanks for having me on. I appreciate sort of the opportunity to connect with your audience and encourage anyone who wants to connect with us to please do. That's sort of what we do. We're interested in hearing what other people think and how we can sort of incorporate those ideas into our work.
And folks, even if you're listening from outside of the Corn Belt, it doesn't mean that diversity doesn't apply to you. So a lot of the concepts and things that they've discovered there are still interesting for you to log into, because, yep, you need to do more than small grains in Montana, and we need to do more than permanent culture almonds and pistachios in California, and need to do more than you know hope for rain in Western Kansas. So we need to be taking proactive look at how we're growing our crops and systems together. And some of the foundation work that they're doing there at Diverse Corn Belt applies to you too. So we really appreciate your time, Emily. Thank you for you're the chief cat herder in an amazing diverse array. The last meeting I was at, just seeing all the different stakeholders it's a complicated, convoluted mess that you're bringing order to, and we really, really appreciate it.
I'm a cat myself. That's what makes me a good herder.
There you go. Well, thanks for your time today, Emily.
Yes, thank you, Monty.
What a great conversation. We give a huge thanks to Emily for exploring with us what diversification can look like on traditional corn soy farms. From agroforestry, like planting walnuts with corn, to suggesting modifications to crop insurance, like extended coverage to diverse crops, exploring whole farm operations to open doors for systems like extended rotations, or agroforestry helping farmers stack enterprises. It's great to see how folks are working together, not only for the benefit of the growers' bottom line, but for the resilience of the communities they call home. And be sure to subscribe to the AgEmerge podcast for more examples of ways we can diversify to navigate and grow. And if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing, visit our website at asn.farm. And there you can click on links to follow us on Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. There's a lot of great things happening and always something to learn. Thanks for listening.